Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is the fellow who guides forest management, I take it, here in Menominee County, Ron Waukau, and he is going to speak on riparian forest management in Menominee County. And I'll leave it to Ron to explain his position and introduce himself. Look forward to hearing from you, Ron.
I'm good.
Right this forward.
All right. Morning. Good morning, and I appreciate being able to speak here today. My name is Ron Waukau, forest manager for this beautiful resource that we have here on the Menominee Reservation. It's quite humbling to be able to have the title forest manager. I've been on the forest for 30 years, working in all different positions and departments of the forest, including fire. So to be able to have a staff that I have and to be able to do what we do on the forest each day is truly, we're grateful that we're able to do that. So the presentation today will be, it'll be like a history. I don't know how many folks have been on Menominee forests before and have seen it, toured it, maybe. Okay. How many want to? I know I see some local guys here that as well. So I'll give you a little history, a little bit about our management, our departments, what we do, kind of what we do in the zones, riparian zones, and do a little bit of fire. So hang on. So whenever we talk about the forest, we do talk about, the past, present, and future, and the importance of the forest to our community, to our tribal members. So, it starts with the past. We look, I always owe it to our past leaders and chiefs that we were able to stay here and to have this land ethic that pretty much was sustainability. Chief Oshkosh, who you see here, was talking about sustaining what we have for generations. And this was, if we didn't have that type of leadership in the past, we wouldn't have what we have today. So I always make sure that we put that in, and it's an important part of our message. It's still in our management plan. Our forest management plan has all of this messaging and all of this stuff in it. So in present, like I talked about, we're managing the forest based on, with all these things considered. It's, the cultural, spiritual part, obviously the production, the employment, the importance of that, and the quality of life, and to sustain it all, to make all of those things fit isn't easy all the time. But we do our best in that aspect. And then we continue it. So we're managing it. We're just a little blip on the timeline of this forest. We're just going to do our part to manage it. And we're providing it, hopefully turning it over to future managers, hopefully future tribal members that are able to manage our forest and carry it forward in the same tradition. For those of you that are from out of state, are not too familiar, this is where we're located. Obviously, you guys are all here, so you Googled it and showed up. So, but the land. So each of dates on there basically shows what the Menominee territory looked like pre-settlement. So it was a large land base, Door County, up both sides of the bay, and down south all the way to Lake Oshkosh, Lake Winnebago. So, and then whittled down to what you see in the green in the 1854 final treaty. So this kind of gives you an idea of where the land, the traditional knowledge was being used, a lot of fishing, a lot of stuff around the lake and the bay. The tribal members were savvy in how they were able to fish and gather. Again, we're here. Kushina, you'll see this map a lot. Just it's gonna show we have cover type maps and all different types of maps to show you. Just a satellite image for those of you that do not know. You can see our resource from satellite, from space. So this is like an April image of snow melt, snow clear down here. Snow lines about by Oshkosh, and you can see, if I can be steady enough, you can see our forest kind of bumps out, stands out there. The line you see is a natural disturbance, a tornado from 2007 that went through, kind of still sticks out in that image. So I guess we're georeferenced. We're used as a georeference when you're, those of you who know that term, to get yourself oriented with a reference point. So for us here, this is the oldest map that I could find in our forestry center. And it's a 1914 planning map. We kind of did our own little GIS version of it, but you can see the importance of scattered open pine that was burned east. So we got the Wolf River, got Kashina where we are here. We got the lakes, all the wetlands, Neopet. So we had scattered open pine, which was kept open with the use of fire. Pre-settlement was burned, a lot of burning going on for gathering, berry gathering. We had, the streams for travel, lakes, wild rice. Then you had the big hemlock hardwood areas for maple syrup gathering. So everything, the traditional knowledge of this tract of land was what Menominees knew. And Chief Oshkosh actually went up to Minnesota to look at a site where the government wanted to send the Menominee tribe, and came back with not good reports. Like our knowledge, we have no knowledge of that area. This is knowledge that we know, and this is where we can thrive and live. So I always think this slide's a good indication of that. Some pretty crazy, just to show the diversity of our forest. These are cover type maps. So each, in the key, I don't know if you can see, it's basically showing a very diverse forest from big blocks of northern hardwood, sugar maple, to pine. The red indicates pine, the Wolf River. So there's quite a bit of diversity here, and when we manage the forest, I'll get into that later. We kind of use a habitat typing key. And we do harvest actively. So 63, each one of these is a CFI measurement, continuous forest inventory. So the forest was trying to be done every 10 years, which is a pretty intensive, expensive measurement of 900, almost 1,000 plots on the forest. Very detailed plots that indicate growth, measures our harvest, our volumes, what's removed, how much growth is replacing that. So as you can see, this slide in 99 is the last measurement. We're still processing the 2016 data. It's a massive amount of data to process and get through. So it's just about cleaned and done. So we'll add that to this chart. But as you can see, it's going up as we're cutting, the forest is growing faster than we can cut. And we've been cutting around. Our goal is about 20 million board feet a year. We haven't been anywhere near that, but we're sustaining our forest, basically what it's showing. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the numbers. Sorry, the numbers on the left are million board feet. Yeah. Harvest. Yeah. And then harvested. And then the year. Sorry about that. So when we look at our management, we use forest community type. We use the plants. And how many are familiar with forest community the habitat classification system. Okay, so we look at, we can grow, the extreme example is down here. This is basically sand. So if you look at the map, it's basically a glacial, where the glaciers pushed and retreated. This is all outwash sands in our lakes. And then this is our heavier, richer soil up here in the top. So we have everything in between. A wide mix of soils that we are able to grow. And so we look at the plants and we do a plant survey when we're looking at management. So the extreme would be growing. We don't want to grow sugar maple in the sand country, and we don't want to grow pin oak up in, the richer soil we want to grow. So we look at those, we key it out. And when we get to those real tough decisions about what we have to make or grow there for the future, we'll use the forest habitat type, which is tied to the cover type, obviously, threw that back in there. So just to picture a few plants. It's pretty amazing now. You can get apps on your phone. Who has an app on their phone to identify plants? Yep. We give it to our interns, just because they would come in. We have interns every summer, and they'd come in with a wrinkled up old leaf or a plant, and like, what is this? Yeah, we don't know. So we put that after carrying it around today, but we give them the app, and you can just take a picture on your phone, and it gives you. They're really slick. So there goes all of the training and all of the local knowledge that we had in plants. You just need an app. So everything that we do is on a schedule. Everything that we cut and everything that we plan is on schedule. You can see the year. So for us, it's logging year schedule. So you can see by the color in everything in the green. Dark green is everything from 2014 to 2022. So all of that will come up. So we have in our GIS system, we have 10,000 stands on the forest. Every single one of those stands has a logging year. So whether it's a complete compartment or individual stands, it has a logging year on it. And then they'll come up. So when we start looking at planning for 2023, we query that year, everything comes up, and then we start doing the work that we need to do in those stands to get it ready, whether we're going to cut it or not, whether we're going to treat it or not. So everything's heavily planned and scheduled. And our steps to harvest, initial start with the stand exam. So all of the stands that I mentioned before are on there. Then we write a prescription based on the treatment type that we're going to do. The timber is eventually marked for removal or even age. Then we cruise it to get an estimated volume. So we know our logging contractors and our sawmill, that's a big thing. We run our budgets. So they're looking at our budgets of what species, how much we're going to cut, what time of year is that coming in. All of that planning goes into it. So they have an idea. And then we put it up for bid. Then once it's harvested, THA stands for Timber Harvest Administration. They monitor to make sure that harvested only marked trees. We close it out. And at that point, when it's closed out, then we add a new logging year. So whatever the treatment type is, if it's a even age management, say a clear cut, we'll put 30 years on there, and 20, 50, whatever, somebody will go back in there and start the process all over. Or even age stands we do more on a 15-year rotation, single tree, and we'll just throw a new logging year on that stand once it's completed, so it comes back up in the cycle down the road. All the logs are taken to our sawmill in Neopet, and the pulp is all taken to local pulp mills. Veneer logs are taken to veneer mills. So it's quite a process to get there. All staff involved, I'll get to the departments. So silviculture, they're pretty much tasked with writing the prescriptions and doing all the treatments. We have a forest development staff that does tree planting, tree pruning, develops the forest as it grows, the younger stands that we have. Inventory GIS, this is a big one, important one. does all the inventory, keeps all everything on schedule, does all the GIS, does all the mapping, does all the updates, does provide all of the, does the CFI measurements as well. Our newest department is Forest Health. It's like 10 years old, 12 years old. Due to all the invasive and all the other things that we're dealing with, we were relying on the state heavily and the Forest Service when we have any sort of questions when it came to forest health and insects. So we hired Dave Mozell a few years ago. He'd helped develop the program. He's moved on to the Forest Service now, but that's a big one. We only have 3 people in that department, but it's our newest department. And with timber harvest, and we do have a fire program, fire suppression, and prescribed fires coming back. I think we burned about 1,000 acres last year. I'll get into a little bit more about the fire. So silviculture. So for our types of prescriptions often used are even age, uneven age, single tree group, shelterwood, even age management, natural regen conversion. So these all have different, eventually going to get into the wetlands and the riparian. So each one of these have different types of things that we'll have to follow, or we have standards that we follow when it comes to even age selection and uneven age and stuff. So it's all covered. And for those of you that don't know, even uneven age stuff is we probably market on a two age type removal. So we're not on an uneven age. We're coming back in every 15 to 20 years and doing a thin in there. So we're in our model, we're looking at the high risk, the low vigor type trees to get it removed. The trees that are of higher quality in the stand remain. We leave them in there to put on more growth. So ultimately, if your sustainability model catches up to your removals, you have nothing but good trees left in your stand at some point. But we inherited a very old and mature forest. So we're on our 6th in those type entries. We're on about our 6th entry of single tree selection removals. So we're getting there, and there was not a lot of marketability of pulp back in the 70s and even into the 80s. So that those weren't really, our crop trees weren't getting the proper release at that time. They would just cut them, or they wouldn't cut them. There was no, so, we kind of fell behind the curve with that. So the single tree removes individual trees, open up the crown, and you can see it, when we open up an area and we thin it in the summer, you can see the sunlight, the openings that we created, and it takes about half around to the next rotation, about 7 years before that completely covers and is shaded back out, almost 100% shaded back in there. So the crowns do expand and they do grow. We do shelter woods, just throw these slides out. It's basically taking your natural stand of pine or oak and using a natural seed fall to regenerate it. So it's a method that we use in our mature white pine stands. We're looking at our success and our challenges in those stands right now. We're doing a pine assessment to review what we've done, and might take a little bit different approach on that moving forward as we get into it. Just a picture of some of these are 180-year-old white pine we're talking about. Once they reach rotation age, we have one between about 130 years old before they'll trigger a regeneration cut. So these are about 180 years old, probably about 140-foot tall white pine. This one was burned. I like putting this slide in. So we've been putting fire back in this one, maintaining it with fire, waiting for a seed fall. So we'll monitor the crowns now for any cone development. The thing with shelter wooding and doing this type of cut is the seed fall only comes every 7 years, a good one. So you got to watch your acre balance. You got to keep things in you really got to monitor. Some seed years are really good, but they're really sporadic. So so we've been putting fire in as a holder. So we'll use fire to hold it, keep back because on these habitat types, everything wants to grow well. So you get a lot of shade, a lot of maple, a lot of aspen, birch will come back in here. So we've been putting fire in here to maintain it. Watching for seed. Once we get the seed, then we'll site prep. We'll get it ready for the seed fall. Even age, we have a lot of aspen stands. We have a lot of even age type management, the shelterwoods and even age type management. So I took it out. I used to have clear cut in here. I took that term out. But we do that type. So I threw this doesn't mean anything to you guys. It's for me. So this is type of like a GIS, like a query. So I did treatments by acre. So all of our treatments are numbered in acre. So the big number there, 2147 last year was even age, single tree selection. So all those acres total, there's like 3,000 acres there. So that's what we treated last year on the forest. That was actual treatment, whether it was a clear cut, even age, a pine plantation, a single tree select, any of the treatments that we do, those are the acres total. So that's total impacts about 3,000 to 4,000 acres a year that we actually harvest on the forest out of 220,000. Through the slide, and this is our guide, and it has been for a long time since it came out. So we manage the best management practices for water quality. Very important to us. Our biggest river and most important river is the Wolf River, and there's been a exclusion of that, a quarter mile on each side of it. The tribe put that in 2005. So we're not actually doing any logging around that wetland and during that riparian zone. Quarter mile, it was put in for cultural purposes because there's so much there's so many cultural resources in that quarter mile, and we didn't have the resources to go out and map it all. So the tribe thought the easiest thing to do was just take it out. So we have ordinance beyond on top of the BMPs. The tribe put in their own ordinance. It was adopted in 2005. So it's called forest management and development. Within that, I just cut a little snippet out of here of what, when we're setting up a job or when we're going out and doing any type of management, even age or otherwise, these are some of the guidelines that are put in the tribal ordinance. Probably very similar to the BMPs, but that's what, and we're talking about slope. So we don't cut, we have, so if it's a wetland and there's zero slope and there's water, then we're 100 feet. We're 100 feet from the waterway, 50 foot from a wetland. So when we set up any of these cuts, if it's doesn't matter if it's just a little vernal pond, we consider that a wetland, and we'll put the 50 foot or 100 foot buffer in around that as we're setting up these even age cuts. So a clear cut, a shelterwood, any of this type of management would require this strip to be in. And then we go on slope. The more slope, obviously, the further the distance we go from the wetland. This is taken right from our prescription. So when we write a prescription, and I'll go back a little bit. So each year, whatever we're going to treat, we have a prescription process. The silviculturist, so we go to the stand exam. The forester writes the prescription. We put it on a blog. We have Menominee Tribe Environmental Services Department. We have DNR. We have BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We have historic preservation. So everyone's on this blog, and everyone can see this prescription that we've written, and everyone can comment on it. So this is just the language that we have in there, and you can see all BMPs, tribal ordinance requirements are followed. And then they're followed up. So the monitoring of that is done when we're setting it up. So we use hypsometers. We're very, very precise. And when we measure distances from wetland, we have a person standing on the edge of the wetland with the hypsometer outside and making sure that we're the exact distance from the wetland and that we protect these. So we do have there's more language in there than this. I just took a little bit out just to show you guys my video. I don't want to go to it. A little bit about fire. We do use fire here on forest as well. We use it for wildlife openings, fuels, reduction, prescribed burns, prairie, restoration, site prep. We use it in the silvicultural end as well. Just a little bit of fire history. Is anyone familiar with this map? So it was a map done based on General Land Office survey notes from 1832 to 1866. And then a professor at Madison, Mladenoff, made this map. So it's basically pre-settlement vegetation of Wisconsin. So you can see the amount of red is pine. There's actually some that white. Oops, white is prairie. How much prairie was down? So at every, I think it was a 40 acre. Whoever was doing the survey would note the vegetation at that corner marker. And this was actually from the forest. 2916. And I use it because it has entered burnt lands. And then after a certain distance, they leave burnt land. So it kind of shows the amount of fire and fire activity that was occurring on the forest back in. And this is from 1845. So it's actual notes that were done on the forest. These are throughout the whole state. So we took those notes and made our own little map of the forest as well, rough little GIS map. But you can see the amount. So this is brush. So we had a lot of brush. Again, this is all going back to tying it back to fire and the amount of fire history. So we are considered I was considered like a timber tribe, but pre-settlement, we're a hunter-gatherer society, and that was kept that way with fire. The tribal members knew and understood fire. They knew where to burn, when to burn. They're very knowledgeable with the use of fire. This one. Brown, it's kind of the brown color. So yeah, there's no, yeah. And there's, yeah. And, so this was all being burned. We knew, talk about man-made versus natural fire. What do we have with our lightning here? All the Wisconsin folks, rain, and usually lots of it. So we did have some natural starts. We do have them. We have lightning strikes once in a while, but it has to be an extended, pretty much like an extended period we've had, maybe a couple of weeks without any rain. We might get a lightning strike without, everything has to line up perfectly for that, but so that we know they're all man-made. This is a map of the reservation. So without any labels, Kashina's here. In the Wolf River. So that's our pre-cover type. So I go back to this map. So when we look in 1830, this brush that was typed as brush in the survey, you go to 1914 and it shows up as young pine. So it was natural disturbance that created that stand, and now it's at those 180-year-old, 130-foot tall pine you're seeing now in this very area. So I'll bring up June 15th, we had a wind event. Again, 7 million feet of timber blew down on the forest, and it went right through this original natural disturbance area. So we're going to take these areas, and look at them and try and use the natural disturbance openings that were made and try and get some pine regeneration back in there. Instead of, trying to mimic it, we'll use what nature gives us in them openings, and then we're going to put, try and grow pine in there. It's trying to repeat itself. That's where I'm looking at it. It's trying to come back. Fire scars, I talk a little bit about fire. The big campaigns of smoky and fire prevention came into effect. So each one of these marks is a tree. The number is a compartment and stand. So this is a tree. This is a fire scar, indicates a fire scar. You can see we went around in all these stands that we harvested and found trees with fire scars and looked at. And you can see when the campaign started, fire basically was taken out the ecosystem. It was a natural occurrence, whether it was man-made or natural occurrence. We removed it, which in a sense took our forest from a more fire-prone, open type pre-settlement look to a more shaded, and there was an increase in shade tolerant maple trees. So we took fire out, and then it starts to fill in with maple understory, kind of what you see around the building here. So we've become less fire prone. Whereas out west, it's the opposite. Lack of cutting, lack of harvesting has made areas, insects, invasives, beetle kill has made forests more fire prone. This is an old, it's in the same area, but you can see the gentleman in this amazing stand of pine. This is up by WW north central part of the reservation. And so these are the decisions we have to make. Do we manage pine? If we don't do any pine management or open it back up, it's going to slowly go right back to a northern hardwood setting. You can see here, there's a couple of pine left, but you can see it's filling in with hardwood. And if that's what we want to do, if that's what the tribal members want, that's what we'll do. But you can see the difference, because that's how it looked at, in late 1800s, early 1900s. This is County M East, anyone that knows, looking towards South Branch off of Highway 55. So when we get tribal members, we try to educate them and do outreach about doing even age management or clear cutting. It's like, well, 100 years ago, there was no trees there. It was all burned over and there was no trees there to begin with. It's a part of it, how much of this landscape do we want to have, and all those discussions that we have with the membership. Just a picture of us burning. This is actually from the forest. DNR plane saw our smoke, came over, took a picture. I asked him for it, and I've been using it in my presentation ever since. So we put it back on the land. We want to use it. It's why these stands were created. Originally, the origins of the stands have fire in them, natural disturbance. So we want to put it back in there and use it as well. So that's it. Time okay? All right. Any questions? Go ahead.
So when I see the big satellite photo of Brad, open southwest, you guys work together with Dr.
Not a lot. Yeah, that's a good point. That used to be a big square. A reservation was a big square until 1854. Stockbridge Treaty was done in 1856. We don't work forest management wise. Cooperatively, we communicate. Like the windstorm hit them pretty hard the same windstorm. So it started kind of down by them and came up through, but I've been communicating them on their cleanup and our setup, but we don't actively manage with them, if that's what you're asking. Just good communication with them. Sorry. All right. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Fire used in riparian areas?
We haven't used, has fire used in riparian areas here. We haven't used it in any of the riparian areas. Our main use of fire has been in either for fuels reduction or silvicultural use. But if we, no, I'll answer it that way. Some of the bogs and some of the cattail marshes would probably benefit for some fire, but we'd rely on more on the environmental services department and the tribe to direct us in any of those type burns. So I don't want to say we're strictly forest management. We currently don't have an ecologist or any of those type folks on staff, so we kind of leave that to the tribe. But we would do it. We would burn. We have access to. We do assist in burns in the north, like in Lac Flambeau, with some of the Great Lakes Agency doing marsh burns. So we've been assisting in those type burns with the BIA.
In terms of harvesting, you're contracting out the work, but the tribe is involved in tree culture and growing the trees.
Yeah, all of our cutting is contracted out with local, mainly Menominee logging contractors.
In terms of clear cutting versus selective cutting, in overall, how much does the profitability determine your operations?
The profitability from so the even age type clear cutting stuff would all go to the pulp mills, and all of the saw log, the more selections type stuff would all go to Neopit. So it is, we try and balance it, because a lot of that earlier harvesting is in the smaller pulp diameter trees, and then once August comes around and we move more into our saw log, but we got to keep the balance and keep the mill operating as well. So it's a balance that we try and keep, so the guys can keep working from May, usually from May until February, March they work. And we have right now, we suspended all cutting operations on any contracts. All the guys are out cutting the windstorm damage. Yeah, we put them all in the wind in the blowdown areas.
We have one last question. Chris.
Go ahead.
The Wisconsin best management practices for water quality, and then you have your kind of tribal specific buffers. Help me understand where you apply one versus the other, if you've seen more success in protecting, water resources, one versus the other.
We apply. So the monitoring end of it, we've always used the BMPs as a guide. So pre-tribal ordinance being in place, that was our document. We had state here. We had a liaison forester actually in the building, helping us with all of that. So any of the questions. So it's a lot of the language from the tribal ordinance is almost directly correlates with the BMPs. So in certain areas, they are a little bit more. There's a little bit more stringent for the tribal one, and we make sure that we follow it. So we're not monitoring. We're not doing any post monitoring of the wetland or impacts. We just make sure that we're following. So if the tribe comes in and takes a look at it, that we're mainly our distances, and so any of the long-term monitoring of impacts that we're having, we're not really seeing those right now.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much, Ron.